Apilgrimageforbrianhaw, spiritual journey of relevance from the ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral by Lee D. Miller. It's me. Day one. I've just gone from Barking to Isle of Dogs, across to Greenwich, down to Woolwich and along the Thames, halfway, right along the Thames. And yeah, carrying on. My thoughts then turned back to thinking about Brian Haw and my feet, and I was now acutely aware that I was gasping for a beer. It had been a long day. It was now around 7 in the evening and it was still quite hot. Although lowering in the beautiful blue sky, the sun was still shining, and it's shining brightly. I managed to find my way to the Riverside Gardens in Erith and thought that this would be a nice place for another break. I found a little newsagent nearby, bought a nice cold beer and returned to sit in the sun. Oh, it was bliss, and I savoured the moment. The thing is though, after you've had a cheeky one, you always feel like a cheeky two. And after I thought, and I half thought about it, but I maintained discipline to carry on. I was now walking through the town centre in Erith, and it took all of my willpower not to show any sign of the pain I was in. I slowly and carefully took one pace at a time. I knew from a map that just past Erith there was some open space and some greenery, and I was banking on there being an appropriate place to camp. If there wasn't, I knew that I was somehow going to have to make it all the way to Dartford, and I dreaded that thought. I came upon a supermarket and went in to buy some fresh supplies, a bit of fruit, some milk for the morning, a couple of cans of beer and a 5 litre bottle of water. I figured I needed that much water, not only to replenish my fluids, but also so I could have a good wash before I retired for bed. I left the supermarket carrying the carrier bag of supplies in one hand and the gallon of water in the other. With my backpack on my back and through gritted teeth, I resumed my extreme torture. The Thames path at this point heads slightly inland and through an industrial park, which is probably quite awful to walk through at the best of times, but for me, at that moment, it had strayed into the abysmal. Even though it was a Saturday evening, there remained much traffic passing through and the pavement was inundated with curbs and vehicle entrances. It was very dusty and quite disenchanting. My body ached, my back felt awkward, and even my hips felt out of sorts. I really need to find a place to camp, and soon. By the end of the stretch of road, salvation appeared to materialise. I had finally reached the green area that I had noted on the map. There was a small roadway leading to a car park, which in turn denoted the entrance to a country park kind of area. Hallelujah! Finally I was there, and I hope that this would indeed be the answer to my prayers. I ambled along the track, which was bordered by a field enclosing some horses. It seemed quite inaccessible and not entirely appropriate to camping, so I had to move on further. Damn, I thought, and persevered in my search. I followed the track further along and hoped that I would find a good spot. As I passed through a car park, I saw where the path rejoined the banks of the River Thames, and what a sight it was. It was perfect. It was the first example of natural riverbank I had come across that day, and it looked exquisite in the evening sunshine, almost like a country meadow beckoning me to come and have a walk through it. But then, what was that I could hear, disturbing the tranquil setting? A scrambler was hurtling along the path in the distance and towards a group of young lads awaiting its arrival. The scrambler arrived with a screech. The lads swapped over riders and the next person took their turn. They were obviously using the path as a track to burn along. Bugger, 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 I thought. This was where I was hoping to set up camp for the night, and I couldn't do that while these youngsters were there. You always want to pitch a wild camp in a place where there is no one around and in a place that is relatively unseen. The young people all looked at me as I approached them, and I had no choice but to continue walking onwards. As I passed, they all gave me a puzzled look, and I gave a nod of acknowledgement in return. I was obviously a very peculiar sight to them, with my backpack, gallon of water, carrier bag, and look of constipation. About 50 yards after I passed them, I stopped and surveyed the landscape. There was a low-lying area of grassland to my left, and by the waterside, which would have been perfect if it wasn't for the proximity of the youngsters. But I also noted that the path bared around to the right further ahead, and I felt hopeful that there would be an ideal spot. Come on, not far to go now, I thought to myself. I resumed walking along the path and towards the bend, when the scrambler came back into view on its return leg. Not wishing to spoil the lad's enjoyment, I stepped to the side of the path in order to allow ample room for the bike to pass, and so I didn't risk being knocked over. What was nice though, and quite surprising I have to admit, was that 20 or so yards before the kid reached me, he slowed right down so as not to disturb me too much. As he went by at a very slow speed, he then gave a nod of thanks and appreciation. I reciprocated the nod, and after he passed me, he sped back into top gear again. Nice touch, I thought. Young man, nice touch. As I continued, I heard the bike come back once more from behind me, so I repeated my path evacuation exercise. Procedure. Was this procedure? Could be an exercise. I think exercise sounds better actually. Once more, and again, the next youngster slowed right down and gave a nod of thanks as he passed quite close by me. I couldn't argue with that, and I thought, fair play. The bike was very noisy and created much dust as it sped at full speed away, and that, I have to admit, I found highly irritating. But I also remembered what it was like at that age, and I didn't want to ruin their fun. They were taking liberties by doing what they were doing, and in a place that they really should not be doing it. But it didn't bother me that much, and I didn't see that they were doing any real harm. It was a Saturday evening, and there was no one around, there wasn't anyone about. I thought that was better for them to be out here and doing this rather than getting bored and doing something abusive somewhere else. I thought again that there were probably plenty of tracks these days for them to be using instead, but I also knew what it was like. Those tracks cost money, and sometimes you and all your friends haven't got it, or those tracks are just not open on a Saturday evening. I saw that I could walk just as well along the low-lying grass, and so I departed the path and carried on walking adjacent to it. Then something quite amazing happened. As the bike came speeding back, the young fella looked at me and saw what I'd done. Even though I was nowhere near the path anymore, and even though it was clear that it would not be disturbing me in any way, he still slowed right down and gave me a nod of thanks and acknowledgement. Top drawer, I thought. Young man, top drawer. You know what, I thought then, young people in general, and by and large, are good. That has always been my experience. There are so many good-natured and decent youngsters out there, and I am sickened of the bad press they are so often labelled with. Yes, young people can be poorly behaved at times, but I've found, through all my experience, that there is usually an underlying reason for that poor behaviour, and that reason is usually because at some point in their past they have been failed by an adult in some way and have not received enough of the right kind of attention, love, or have been given the right kind of guidance, boundaries. I have found that usually their negative actions are by way of a test to see how much you really care, and if shown what respect is, and if given respectful boundaries, then every young person whom I have ever worked with or encountered has responded positively and eventually with reciprocated respect. That is my experience, and that is what I was thinking after the young man's kind gesture. And I didn't mind what they were doing, they weren't harming me. The grassland diminished as the track turned a corner, and so I climbed back up the short embanked grass verge in order to rejoin the path. As I reached the zenith, laid out before me was paradise. Oh my god, what a relief, I thought. The day was almost over and I found the perfect spot. It was beautiful grass riverbank around the corner from where the group of lads were standing, several hundred yards away and out of sight from anyone other than those using the path. I could see people in the bar at the Erith Yacht Club further down the river, perhaps half a mile away, but they were not close enough to notice me. Other than that, there was the river and the beautiful sun, lowering in the perfect blue sky and preparing to set over the backdrop of Rainer marshes on the opposite side of the River Thames. After the ordeal I had been through that day, this was heaven. Blimey it was. I descended back down the short verge and relieved myself of all I was carrying. How good was that? I immediately felt 10 feet tall, and I took my shoes off and felt them touch the soft grass. Oh, don't get me wrong, they were still painful, but just being out of the poor footwear reduced the pain by half. I sat down, then I lay back into the long grass and looked upon the heavens. You could get lost in the sky like that, I thought. It was truly exquisite. It was just before 9 p.m. and I reckoned I had about another hour and a half left of daylight. The bike went by again on the path behind me, and I thought that I wouldn't be able to set up camp just yet. I'd have to wait until the young group had enough and disappeared. There was only one thing for it then: time for a beer. It was actually a really joyous moment, hearing the can open, taking a swig and putting it to my forehead. The scenery was delightful. I really couldn't have dreamed for a better place to camp. And I was grateful that my intuition had served me so well. I hadn't expected a natural site like this though, and I couldn't believe that a location like this still existed along the banks of the crowded River Thames. I sank my beer. I thought back over the day. As I sank my beer, I thought back over the day I'd just had, and what a day it had been. I inspected my feet, and they were red raw in places. The blisters on both of the bottom of my heels measured approximately 1.5 inches. But 1 inch. The blisters on the bottom of my heels measured approximately 1 inch by 1.5 inches, and the ones that stretched out across both the balls of my feet measured about 3 inches by 1 inch. The blisters around my little toes and on the back of my heels were quite severe, but in all honesty they were just run of the mill in comparison to the oval blisters on the bottom of my heels. It was those that had been the real killers throughout most of the day, and even the very large blisters across the balls of my feet created pain that was nothing in comparison. The astonishing thing was though, somehow, or maybe the cardboard played a part in it, I don't know, not one part of my skin had been broken and no blister had burst. It was astounding. I was shocked, and I actually felt quite blessed. Would you believe? After all, I've been through a day like that and I was still in the game. Amazing. I was truly amazed. Absolutely. I poured water over my feet and raised them slightly as I sat there in the grass. I felt the light breeze from the river blowing around them and so cooling them even further. Oh, the bliss, the absolute bliss. I didn't feel pain anymore. Just a warm, throbbing sensation and an uncanny sense that they were already beginning to heal. Those damn shoes, I thought. Bloody holy land. Then I had a little laugh to myself. Yeah, I just did. And in that moment, I realised something. My pilgrimage was in remembrance of Brian Haw and what he had done for what he believed in. And on that day, the 25th of June 2011, I had spent the best part of it thinking about him and what he had done. In fact, it was only because I was remembering Brian Haw that I'd managed to get through the day at all. There was a peculiarity about the way I was suddenly feeling though. On the one hand, I felt thankful for the help I'd received in getting through the day, and yet, on the other hand, I felt that I'd been tested in some way and that I'd just passed the test. Now, this will sound ever so dramatic, I know, and I hope I'm not entering into the realms of self-indulgence when I retell this moment, but I do want to make this account to be honest, as honest a reflection of my experience as I can, and this is what happened next and how I genuinely felt. I looked to the heavens and my eyes filled with tears. It's hard to express how I felt in that moment. I cannot describe. But Brian Haw was a very intelligent man, a very astute man, and a very wise man who endured much for the cause of life that he so much believed. And as I sat there in the long grass by the River Thames, I just hoped that I'd proved in that day that I was worthy enough to have been doing what I was doing. I put my hands together and I prayed. I told you it was dramatic, didn't I? I heard the motorbike as it passed behind me once more. The sun was just setting over the rain and marshes, and I finished my beer as it did so, leaving a light red and orange haze stretching out across the horizon. It was so beautiful, and I felt so fortunate to be where I was. It was time to put up my tent, regardless of the youngsters. I put my flip-flops on and set about positioning my tent on the farthest piece of ground I could find before I erected it. I put my flip-flops on and I set about positioning my tent on the flattest piece of ground I could find before I erected it. Once done, I started settling in and I unpacked my sleeping gear. The bike returned again, and I noticed it slowed down as it passed that part of the path closest to me. The lad was having a nose, but I thought it was okay as I didn't think that they were going to bother me in any way. I made myself some food, grabbed my other beer and sat halfway in my tent while taking in the wonderful scene as the light began to fade. The sky slowly turned from its quintessential sky blue to that of a darker pigment. I could still see Erith Yacht Club in the distance, and I saw that there were people out on what looked like the terrace of the bar. I was waiting for dusk to set in so that I could then have a shower before I retired to bed. I was a little bit concerned that someone may be able to see me, but I usually work to the general principle that if I can see no one, then no one can see me. As the light faded and the blue gave way to black, I could only see a short distance away from me, and there was no sign or sound of the youngsters and their motorbike anymore. So it's time for me to strip off and have a good wash. So it's time for me to strip off and have a good wash. Right, don't look. It was a lovely place, so very peaceful, and there was no longer anyone around. After I'd washed and dried myself, I put on my night clothes and attended to my feet. The redness had subsided to that of dark pink, and the fluid in the blisters had already reduced a little. It was pleasing to see. I massaged them for a while and then applied copious amounts of Savlon. After that, I got into my sleeping bag, raised my feet slightly by putting a pile of clothes at the bottom of my bed, and went to zip up the tent. "Good night, world," I said as I took my last view of it before I closed my eyes to sleep. Some stars were starting to appear in the night sky, and the air felt very still. I zipped my tent up and allowed my head to hit the pillow, and then I slept. There's something that happened during that time, that evening, when I was just sitting there having a beer. I've mentioned it to people. I've not put it in the book, and I thought if it ever turned into published a proper book or filmed it dramatically, I'd say what happened here. But when I was sitting there, right in the middle of the Thames, right between Rain and Marshes and where I was at Erith, or that frontage near Erith, there was this. First of all, I thought it was one of those kids' balloons, you know, like when they have a birthday, the silver ones with helium. I thought someone probably let it go, but it just stayed there, and it was reflecting in the sunlight, and it looked like a probably about 100 yards in the air, 300 feet, and it looked as if it must have been, I don't know, about 18 inches, foot and a half, or a foot, something like that, just from the perspective. And it stayed exactly still. And I was just having a beer, watching it. Still there. Still there. Sun was setting, looking up, you could see it was shining. And as I sat there, yeah, I had my shower, got in bed, and the last bits of light, I didn't see it when I got in my tent. It was too dark. But it was there all the time. There was only light for me to perceive it. And my intuition was, it was studying my emotions. I don't know, you can take what you want of that story. It's a difficult one to put into this. But I think in this time, this age, what's happening right now, it's time to reveal that. I wasn't mistaken. It was there for about an hour and a half. Hour and a half I was sitting there. Still there. Didn't move 1 iota, 1 millimetre, 1 inch, 1 centimetre. There was a breeze that day. Didn't move 1 bit. You tell me what can just stay in a position like that for that long without moving above a river. So I think something was studying me. My intuition was something was studying my emotions that day, in that moment. Because that was an amazingly emotional moment when I thought about Brian Hoare at the end of that day. Anyway, make of it what you want. Just telling the truth, it's my truth. And lots of love, and God bless you, Brian.